Okay, okay. I mean, yo, bro, you are very honest. At least you're getting where I'm trying to go. I'm trying to get to the point of what is the single identifiable, single causal principle that actualizes, sustains, and controls existence. And you have honestly said that there is something there, but we just don't know what it is yet. And I can say it's God, but you don't have sufficient evidence to believe it's God. And that's fair. That's completely fair. I understand that. Hey, yeah, bro, I can live with that, man. Look, if you don't see sufficient evidence in your view for accepting God's existence, hey, that's fair. That's fair because you also said that you're open. You're not up here saying, hey, there is no God, God doesn't exist. You're not saying that. You're just saying you're not at this point convinced. And you know there's something that's the causal principle, but you don't know what it is, so you're going to err on the side of caution and say, I don't know. I don't know. Are you are you further removed because of the conservation of energy theory that energy cannot be created or destroyed? The requisite of time being a requisite. Okay, so do you think that time is eternal? Okay. I see what you mean. So it would have to require succession of events in order for what we have now to even be possible, which would mean that time would be eternal. Okay. Yeah. I see, I see, I see, I see. In my worldview, I just use because when we study systematic theology, we learn about temporal order and logical order. So when we speak about before creation or before time existed, we're making a distinction between temporal order, which would necessitate time being eternal, as opposed to saying logical order, which would just mean that God would act outside of time in a logical order and create time and the fabric of time. That's how we would explain that in the theological system that I'm a part of. And as well, there's something that you said earlier as well about the universe being eternal. There's a problem that I have identified with that worldview. I'm just going to throw it at you and see how you respond to it. So, what I heard was that, or the article I read, I can't quite tell you where it's from right at this second. If you had a video camera and you came to now, this present moment now, and you hit reverse. If we are living in an infinite or a eternal state or eternal universe, then when you hit reverse, the reverse would never get back to the starting point because there is no starting point. There is no beginning. And if you did the same thing and fast forward, you would never get to the other end of eternity. So eternity has no beginning, no end. It just continues, or you can't even say the word continue because it would necessitate a beginning. So there's no end to either side if you were to use a camera, which would mean that in this moment right now, which is the other end of the past, this moment right now would not be a moment right now because we would never get to this moment. That's a problem that I've identified in that worldview. I don't know how you would answer that. Yeah, yeah. How would you answer? How do we get to now if we are in eternity? Yeah, sure. Honestly, man, I don't think that would be possible because how can you have a are you defining finite moment as present moments like what we have now? Well, yeah, 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 yeah. Of course, of course. If you're using numbers, yeah, yeah, because everybody would agree that numbers have no end. They have no end. You can go into the negative and to the positive, going up and going down, and you can just keep going. Yeah, yeah. It's very difficult to articulate this. I trust me, bro. I yeah. Go ahead. Okay. But how would you deal with the problem of us moving from, let's just say for the sake of argument, on the infinite timeline where numbers are the representatives of the infinite timeline? How would we move from 7 to 8 if we're on 7? Wouldn't that necessitate a freeze in a moment? Yeah, I mean, we experience time in success in a successive way, one event after the other. We are in a causal chain, cause and effect, cause and effect. I guess what I'm asking is if we are in an eternal existence, the universe is eternal, and we are a part of the universe. And I'm just using your way of explaining it. And we are one of the numbers, having numbers represent the infinite timeline. How we get from one number to the next number is where I'm having challenge understanding the phenomenon, because I don't think that most people in the scientific community agrees that the universe is eternal. I think that they would say that the point that expanded, that point before the expansion, if we can even say before the expansion, because the expansion would necessitate time and stuff. Um, the Big Bang is expansion, as some would call it. That expansion, they would say, has always been there. But I've never read anything thus far, that says that which is expanding is that which is eternal. If you get what I'm saying, because if it's expanding, then it necessitates change, and if it's changing, then that would necessitate a beginning, and if it has a beginning, then it can't be eternal. I'm just seeing some problems there. Okay, so the expansion had a beginning. So what's eternal if that had a beginning? Go ahead. I see. And as you rightly pointed out, I would say that that thing is God. That thing is eternal and so on, and it brought everything into existence. And you said you don't know, and bro, that's fair, and I love that we can be fair with each other and be respectful and so on. Yeah. There you go, man. There you go. Thank you so much for your respectfulness, man, and we'll talk again definitely. There you go, man. Have a good one. That was an amazing conversation. That was a big conversation. I mean, you will often find people who are atheist in their identification who they will say that they don't know if God exists, but they are open to being convinced. I mean, bro, that's fair. That is so fair. And then you'll have other atheists who will say God does not exist and there's no way that you can prove that he exists. I mean, like, wow, now that's closed minded and that is so um, authoritative in its knowledge claim. How do you know that no one can prove God exists? And how do you know that God does not exist? I mean, wow. Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. At least I can provide my argument as to why I think God exists and why it is convincing to me as to why he exists. But if you say that my argument is not convincing to you, then all you should say, if you're honest, is that you're unconvinced, but not that because you're unconvinced there is no God anywhere in the world. That's a big leap, man. That's a big leap. I'm sorry, but it's a big leap. And that's my whole argument, guys. I presuppose God's existence based upon I presuppose God's existence based upon what I see and observe around me in the world. Because when I look at the world, it is obvious to me that it what no living or past person can prove any God to be real. Wow, Brandon. Wow. Wow. Do you know everyone who has ever lived in the past and know every argument for God's existence and therefore can make the statement no one has ever proven God's existence or can prove God's existence? If you say yes to that question, I I know very, very well now that you're dishonest. There's no way you can know that. So if you say you do know that, then you're dishonest. Is this the precept guy that can't articulate tag correctly? What? I never use tag, bro. So I don't know if you're well. You're asking a question. So no, I am not the precept guy who can't articulate tag correctly. The problem is God is arbitrary. People fight over different gods. I don't think that God is arbitrary. I don't think so. I think that the God that I'm speaking about, which is Yahweh, is the ultimate unifying single causal principle that actualizes, sustains, and controls all of existence. And all other gods have something about them that Yahweh does not have about him, and that is their eminence. Well, Yahweh has it too, but Yahweh has something more than what they have. Yahweh is transcendent, and no other God is transcendent. They are immanent in that they are literally elements of the universe: rain, fertility, rocks, trees, fruit, food, intercourse, all that stuff. Literally. No, no, you are simplifying, Benji. You are simplifying what I said. You're simplifying it, and it's. I didn't say my God is right and all other gods are not right. I'm saying my God is the creator and sustainer of all things, including all spiritual beings that were worshipped throughout history. That's what I'm saying. So those other gods actually exist because even though they are not the supreme God, other people worshiped them as God. So I'm not denying that other divine beings existed and that other people worshiped them. I'm saying that Yahweh is the creator of all of them, which is something you probably haven't heard before. Benji, just request up and let's have a conversation. I'm not gonna do this drive-by comment thing where you make comments and you don't substantiate them through conversation. Let me see if you can even be requested up. Let me request you up, Benji, and see what's going on here. Hey, Jelani, how you doing, man? Benji, I said it earlier. He's the creator and sustainer of all things because the Bible says so. The Bible. There's only one Bible. Many translations. There are many translations, but there's only one Bible. You have to get the wording correctly. No, you are getting words mixed up. You have to be very precise when you're talking to a theologian, sir. You don't know what a theologian is? Yeah, theologian. By the way, wait, before we even continue, what is a theologian? Before we continue, what is a theologian? So you have no experience studying theology, Christian theology, nothing like that. Oh, it's a waste of time. Oh, so why are you having a conversation with a Christian? Wait. You said it's a waste of time to study Christian theology. You're having a conversation with a Christian. Because I have topics on the board which are related to Christian theology, which you don't care about. You said I'm making claims without substantiating them. Yeah, so why are you even here talking to me if you don't care about Christian theology? Is the question. Yeah, when we care about having conversations, which you don't, because you literally just said it's a waste of time to study Christian theology. Did I misheard you or something? For you. Okay, man. You have a good morning. Get your ass out of here. Not gonna do that. I don't care about you that much. I'm doing good, Jelani. I'm doing good. When someone is gonna come on my live and tell me that they don't care about Christian theology, then don't talk to me. I'm a Christian. Don't talk to me. You don't care about Christian theology, and you want to have a conversation about philosophical atheism. The slavery affirmed by the Bible is not wrong, and Yahweh is real, which are all elements that are covered in Christian theology. You don't care about it, and you want to come up here and talk to a Christian. I don't have. Let me make this clear for the four people that are on here watching. If you see me go live in the future, I do not have conversations with people who think it is a waste of time to have conversations with a particular group of people or a particular topic. This guy came up here and said Christian theology is a waste of time, but yet wants to have a conversation with a Christian. Let me make something clear. If I think that atheism was a waste of time, I would never speak to an atheist about their atheism. Never. That is how irrelevant it would be to me. It's a waste of time. That is how much I don't care about it. Let me see if I can use an example. Um, I never talk about ballet. This is just something I'm now talking about. I never talk to ballerinas about ballet because I don't care about it. It's irrelevant to me. I never talk to ballerinas about ballet. I don't want to know about it. I don't care about it. I'm not interested in it at all. So that is something that I don't care about. So when someone says they don't care about Christian theology, it's a waste of time, and then you want to talk to a Christian, I mean, get the hell out of here, man. Let me just. It's crazy. Benji, you're muted. I don't even want to see your comment. You have a good morning, sir. I don't even want to see your comments. Uh, sure, Jason. I'll bring you up. Oh boy, this guy. Hey, Jason, how you doing? Yeah, sometimes I can be rude, and sometimes I meet rude people. That's how it goes. I would say, bro, I that that is a very hard question, bro. I have to be honest with you. Can I account for them by presupposing the God of the Bible? That would logically imply that by presupposing God, that I account for them. But that argument could be used by anybody. I could somebody could say that by presupposing unicorns, I account for logic. So I don't think. No. Mm-mm. That's not what I do though, because you see the way you frame the question, I'm looking at myself and looking at the way I articulate my arguments and see if that is what I do. But that is actually not what I do. I the pre the presupposition. Oh, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. So if I meet any presuppositionalist who does that, I say, hey, it is not just a presupposition. In my worldview, as a precept, what I do is I base my presuppositions on reasons. In that, I look at the world as it exemplifies itself to me. I see ultimate design and intentionality, and I say that the world presupposes God, and therefore I believe in God. In that the world points to God. In that there is a precondition, and the precondition for the existence of the world is God, and the world points to God, and I just believe that. I wouldn't say that I presuppose. Yeah. Well, I think I can respond to it. I mean, in the world we see unity and diversity, and one of the diverse things that we see is order and disorder. And in my worldview as a Christian, when I use the design principle, I point to the fact that we can observe order, which is design, and we can observe disorder, which are both grounded in a transcendental being who is united and divided at the same time, in that it is a triune being who is three persons and one being. So I can look at the diversity and unity in the universe, and one of those things is order and design, and I can say that that points to a being that is ordered and well, a being that is diverse and unified. So that's what I use. I don't just look at the world and say, hey, this is all design, and how do I differentiate? Because that's a good question. When I use design in the framework of order and disorder, and I see order, and that would point to a being that orders the universe. I see disorder, and that would point to a being who uses disorder to fulfill his purposes. So I just look at the pointing, look at the precondition. Yeah, yeah, and that's fair because what I normally hear is that oh you heard that other guy, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he was saying that he thinks there is something there, but he doesn't know what it is. And you say you don't think it's God, and that's fair. That's fair. I don't have any quarrels with that. What I would say is that my worldview stipulates that there is a God there, and it makes sense to me to say that when I look at the universe and I see instances of rationality, consciousness, and logic, it points to an entity or points to a unifying causal principle that has these qualities, and therefore I can see that in the universe. When someone says they don't know, there is nothing there for me to argue against. I don't. There's no position there to argue against. But if someone says I know what it is and it is a natural entity, I'm gonna say okay. If it's a natural entity, how do you get rationality, logic, and consciousness arising from a source that is ultimately none of these things? It's a challenge. Yeah, yeah. Oh, actually, no, no. I was saying that when I use a circular, when I mentioned circularity, I was making a reference to. I even forgot who the guy was, if it was him or was somebody else. He was saying that he uses um, the scientific method to identify truth propositions or true propositions. And I was saying that if you use the scientific method to identify true propositions, those weren't the exact words that he used, but I'm just explaining it. Then how do you account for induction with the scientific method when induction is a presupposition in the scientific method? It is not something that's proven by the scientific method. And if it is not proven by the scientific method, then it would be a true proposition that did not derive from your ultimate standard of truth, which you use to identify true propositions. So it would be circular in the sense that you're using science to validate science when science can't validate science because it is a methodology that is based upon a presupposition or belief that there are instances in the universe that are regular as opposed to irregular, which is induction. I don't think I would use the logic thing to say that we're using logic to account for logic. I don't think that. I mean, that doesn't even make any sense to me either. To be honest with you. Look, Jason, to a certain extent, every single one of us, when we get to the foundational principles of our worldview, it is going to be circular because those foundational principles in our worldview have to be self-authenticating and therefore circular. Whatever it is, whatever the foundation is, the question then has to be asked: is the foundational principle in the worldview that we're speaking about consistent and therefore has a virtuous circle, or is it inconsistent and has a vicious circle? And what I mean is that if my foundational principle for knowing things is the scientific method, and how much do I know? Because there's a lot of things that we presuppose and believe that have not been scientifically proven. A lot of things that we presuppose. I mean, for example, mathematical rules being universal. That is a presupposition because there's no way of scientifically proving or verifying that mathematical rules are universal. We just presuppose them. I guess what I mean is that they are based upon an argument from ignorance fallacy, in that since there is no evidence against something, then it must be true, or there is no break in the consistent success in our repeatable experimentation of this particular thing. Therefore, since there's no evidence against it, it must be true everywhere. And to me. And bro, I can say from a scientific perspective that is a logical way of viewing things, in that we have not seen a break in the consistency of this thing being constantly verified. Therefore, we don't see any evidence against it, and therefore it's true. But what I don't hear scientists saying, and what I do hear some atheists saying, is that these things will persist, and these things are the same and will be the same in the future. And when I say these things are the same, I mean even before scientists started to evaluate these things, this is how these things acted in the past. But there's no way of knowing that these things were acting those ways in the past. It just has to be assumed. It has to be assumed. And these assumptions are based upon a foundational principle that may be circular virtuously or circular viciously. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I have to admit, I do have circularity in my worldview in that I will say that my epistemological standard is the Bible. That is the way I know true propositions. But if you ask me, well, what justifies the Bible as being, what justifies your book, what justifies that book as being your presuppositional epistemological standard? If I point to anything else, Jason, then that becomes my epistemological standard because that would be what justifies the Bible. Whatever I point to is going to be the standard. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, these are presuppositions that we would have. I would have to presuppose that the laws of logic exist and are consistent, and that my senses are trustworthy and are consistent. Those are presuppositions I would have to make in my evaluation of biblical text. But those presuppositions are grounded in something else. They are grounded in the belief or the presupposition that since the world exemplifies ultimate design and intentionality, there is an ultimate unifying single causal principle that exemplifies and actualize all of that. And this being would be the being that would ground my senses being trustworthy and ground logic being consistent throughout the universe. And therefore, I can look at scripture and draw conclusions from scripture and say that my conclusions can be true and are true because I would be basing it on the traditions of the church. And as well, I could say that atheists can have certainty and can trust their senses because they are all grounded in a single unifying causal principle that has these qualities and that keep these qualities regular. But if I say there is nothing there, or I say this is all based upon a natural law that brought all of this into existence and is sustaining all of this, then since this natural law is impersonal, has no logic, well, I can't say has no logic, I say non-logical, non-conscious, and non-rational. Where did we get instances of rationality and all these other things that we see in the universe? The answer is, well, they are just emergent properties. I mean, where do they come from? It's just, so I know that's a mouthful, and I'm sorry for being, as these things come in my brain, I have to speak them out and try to respond as best as I can. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and yeah. In my worldview, I would say that conceptually, I do have room in my worldview because in my worldview, it is believed, even if it's disbelieved by other people, it is believed that the God who revealed Scripture to the prophets and um, to the prophets, and that was codified in the Bible propositionally and ultimately revealed in Jesus Christ. The God who did that has all knowledge, and what he reveals in Scripture gives the Christian a way and a means of knowing some things with absolute certainty, but not all things, because not all of God's knowledge is revealed in Scripture, just what he wants us to know. So I can have certainty conceptually if it is granted that my worldview is true. I can't have certainty conceptually because some of the things that God has revealed from his all knowing quality has been codified in the Bible. so I can know things with certainty and absolute certainty, because these are things that I know that will not change at any time and at any point, and that is how it would be absolute. But the alternative, and I'm sure that you're probably going to agree with me to an extent, the alternative would be there is no absolute certainty, or absolute certainty does not exist. And somebody can just say, hey, are you absolutely certain that there is no absolute certainty? If I say, if I say yes, I have absolute certainty that there's no absolute certainty, it's self-defeating. If I say no, then I could be wrong and absolute certainty could then be possible. So it both ways seems to defeat the position of radical skepticism about not having absolute certainty. Yeah, yeah. Well, bro, if if it's not absolute certainty about anything, then that's a big that's covered, that covers everything. But if you say you don't have absolute certainty about some things, but you do have absolute certainty about other things, then that's okay. That would be a worldview that could stand criticism. But if you say nothing at all, bro, that covers everything. You could even say that you don't exist. You could be wrong about your own existence. Yeah, it does make sense. But that would be that example as well would still be an absolute claim of your existence. You are a brain in a vat, so you do exist. So your existence would have to be something that you're absolutely certain about, that you exist. So when somebody says that I have absolute certainty about nothing, I can't fathom that. How do you not have absolute certainty about anything? Don't you know that you're here? Don't you know that you are alive? Don't you know that you are, speaking? I mean, there are things that you can know with absolute certainty. I'm just saying that those things are grounded in a transcendental unifying causal principle. And that's what gives us the possibility of having absolute knowledge. And there is absolute knowledge. But to say there are no absolute knowledge claims or knowledge propositions, then is that proposition that you just made absolutely certain? You know? Yeah, it does make sense. But that's why I said earlier that, in my worldview, conceptually, I would have a grounding for absolute knowledge claims. An example I could make would be I know with absolute certainty that human beings are real and human beings are distinct from one another. I could say that I absolutely know that, and that is a truth proposition that is eternal and will always be true. That we are human beings and that we are distinct from one another. I could make that. The difference would be there is no possibility that I'm wrong about what I said, whereas maximal certainty opens opens the door for I could be wrong, because maximal certainty would also be like saying knowledge is probabilistic in that you can have a high degree of probability, and that would be the maximum amount of knowledge or certainty that you can have about a particular claim. But it could be 99.999. It's not 100% certainty. So it opens the door, even if it's a little crack, for saying I could be wrong. Whereas the alternative, which in my worldview, in absolute certainty, it closes that door in that I could not be wrong in my proposition, in that when I say human beings exist and human beings are distinct from one another, I'm grounding that in God's revelation, in that God says in his word, he created all of us and he made us in his image, and that's a plurality of human beings. So I would say that that's absolutely true, and I can never be wrong about that conceptually because the God who knows all things revealed that. So that would be the difference. Well, let me give you quickly the argument, real quickly, really quick, because it's not difficult and it's not long. Okay, so when you study Christian theology, you learn about what the Bible records and what the Bible affirms. And an example would be marriage. If you ask any Christian, what is Christian marriage? What is the marriage that the Bible affirms? They will say unity in covenant between a man and a woman for the purpose of procreation and for the benefit of the spouse secondarily. That's what they would say. But when you look at the Bible records both monogamous marriage and polygamous marriage. The Bible affirms one of them, but it records both of them. So it's the same thing with slavery. The Bible records slavery that is based upon oppression and exploitation. But the slavery that the Bible affirms is a slavery that is based upon justice and fairness, which is mentioned in Colossians 4, verse 1, where it says, Masters, treat your slaves with justice and fairness because you have a master in heaven, Jesus Christ, your Lord. So if a Christian is a slave master, he's supposed to treat a slave like his equal. So what that would look like would be you're a slave on paper, but you are treated like the person's roommate. You are equal. You do what you want for the purpose of living together in unity and harmony. Whereas the other version of slavery would be exploitation. Do what I say when I say it, regardless of your discomfort, because you are below me and you are below anything in my house, less than property or property. So this puts me in a little problem in that when you look at the Old Testament, you see the Israelites capturing people and enslaving them and doing so against their will, and that would be based upon oppression and exploitation. When I admit that God commanded the Israelites in the Old Testament to do evil things, it puts me in a problem with some Christians and atheists who don't think that makes any sense. But when you look at the theology from the early church and the theology from the reformers who reformed the church in the 1500s, they made a distinction between God's decretive will and God's prescriptive will, in that God has prescribed in his law how you should live, but God's decree is that which makes up the very fabric of time, and God will decree evil actions to fulfill his glory in the end through his justice on the wicked and his grace on the wicked as well. So God would command evil actions to fulfill his purpose. An example would be Joseph and his brothers. Joseph said to his brothers after they sold him into slavery, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. So when I say the slavery affirmed by the Bible is not wrong, I mean the slavery that is based upon justice and fairness, which is an expression of God's imago Dei doctrine that all of us are made in his image and all of us are equal, so we must be treated as such. So that's not wrong in any way, shape, or form. The only problem that people would say is that, hey, if someone is owned as a slave, that's wrong. I mean, if you look at slavery as a place in society or a status in society, then statuses in society being lower or higher than other statuses in society is inherently not wrong, because if you work in an establishment, your boss has a higher position to you, but that doesn't mean that you are in a wrong position. So slavery, or a slave would be in a lesser position than his master, but he's treated with equality, justice, and fairness. That can't be wrong because we do that every day. It's not wrong in my worldview. So that's the argument. And certain portions of the Old Testament were evil, and God decreed that to happen for His glory and His purpose. So that's the argument, and I hope it makes sense to you, man. I really do, because that was a lot that I said. I said it was going to be short, but it's not. I'm sorry. Yeah. The tooth and the eye and stuff. The tooth and the eye. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I would say that all of those examples. I would say that any example in the Old Testament where a slave was mistreated, any example in the Old Testament where a slave was held captive against his or her will, were examples of sin and evil. God commanded sin and evil because God uses sin and evil to fulfill his purposes, because he has morally sufficient grounds and reasons why he uses evil to fulfill his purposes. And sometimes we see that in scripture. A big example would be the very unalivement of Christ, in that Acts chapter 4 explicitly says, and you can use this when you read this to some Christians and see if they believe it. Acts chapter 4, verse 27 through 28. It says that what the people did to Christ was done according to the hand and plan of God that he determined to take place from eternity, or plan of God, the hand and plan of God. So you have God using the actions of these people to fulfill his purpose. Because, as you know, in Christianity, we say that Christ's unalignment on the cross is the means through which we are saved when we believe in him and trust in him. That very act, that very evil act, was determined by the hand and plan of God. He uses evil for good. And sometimes we don't know ultimately, well, not ultimately, sometimes we don't know proximately what those evil actions accomplish in our lives. Like, something bad can happen to me tomorrow, and as a Christian, I'm like, God is causing this to happen for a good reason. I may never see what that good reason is in my lifetime, but I have to believe that God is using evil for good, his good purposes. And in that worldview, very last thing I'm going to say, in that worldview, no evil event or evil action is purposeless, but all of them have a purpose and has a meaning. And there is something behind all of this that will ultimately be the glorification of God and his people. Thank you, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I try my best to be as honest as I can, man, because being dishonest is not good, and people who are unbelievers, they can see that, and sometimes they take that to mean this is how all Christians are, and it's it's unfortunate sometimes, It's unfortunate. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're a good dude, man. You're a good dude. Thanks for that. Thanks for that. So, thank you so much, Jason. You have a good one, man. Looking forward to talking to you again. We can, have respectful disagreements again, and leave the conversation respecting each other. Take care. So, good conversations. Good conversation. I was trying to study. I was trying to read earlier tonight, and I was falling asleep. I got bored. So, conversations on TikTok wake you up. They really do. They really wake you up. And um, I've been on here for 49 minutes. You have no concept of verbal abuse. It's very odd. Do you have no concept of verbal abuse? What? I don't know what you're talking about, man. I don't know what you're talking about. When I'm talking to people on here, you rarely hear verbal abuse from my side of the fence. I'm not an abusive guy. Salute, Busy Mo. Salute, man. Salute. I'm generally a respectful guy. I grew up in a home where we had to respect people and respect our elders and stuff like that. So I'm generally respectful But again, Clayster memes, um, Christian normative ethics permits me to be rude when it's merited. Because I can tell you, if any atheist came up here and they were rude to me, I was gonna be rude back. I was gonna be rude back, or just kick them off the live. But being rude back is allowed in my Christian normative ethics, even though I'd rather not be. So I deliberately, I purposely try not to go on atheist lives where all they do is dogpile Christians. There's a difference between rudeness and verbal abuse. This isn't rocket science. Okay, thank you so much for our thank you so much Clayster memes for correcting me and for letting me know that there's a difference between the two of those things. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate you. I appreciate you very much. Thank you very much. Um, Let me see what I have on here. So I've been on here for 52 minutes. I think I can get off now and maybe come back, do some intervals. So these conversations woke me up. They woke me up. Uh, how do I reconcile Psalm 110:1 and Matthew 22:44? I know what Psalm 110:1 says, but what I forgot about Matthew 22:44. Let me read Matthew 24 to 42. I wonder if that is talking about. You know what? I'm not gonna even mention it. Let me try to answer deconstructing belief. See if I can answer that question. And know that Psalm 110:1 speaks about the footstool thing, with David speaking about, say, my Lord said to my Lord. 110:1. Yahweh said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. And Matthew 22:44. I forgot what they said, man. I gotta look at it again. Matthew 22:44. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies beneath your feet. Um, hmm, Deconstructing belief. I don't know what you are referring to. Uh, Matthew is quoting Psalm 110 verse 1. I don't know what you're asking there. How do I reconcile them? I don't see the need for a reconciliation. They are not, you know, this they're not contradictory. So I don't know what you're referring to. They would have to be contradicting each other for me to reconcile them. Mhm. Oh, so you're making reference to Jesus in how he translates, how he quotes Psalm 110 verse 1, in that he does not quote it word for word, and the wording of the two are not exactly the same. Is that what you're referring to? PhD in ADHD. I had some guests up earlier, and I had some guests up earlier, but I am not bringing up any more guests. I'm not. I'm gonna jump off of here in 5 minutes. I've been on here for 55 minutes. I'll get back on later on, maybe in 2 hours or 3 hours, but I'm gonna jump off. I only spend an hour on here. when I'm studying and I get sleepy and I want to have some dialogue and conversation to wake me up. But, you know, who requested just now? Hey ADHD, I'm gonna invite you up, man. See what you have to say, because maybe you want to say something. I'll bring you up. Hey, doing good, man. How you doing? I use the transcendental argument as opposed to the tag argument because the tag argument is simply everything that has a beginning has a cause. The world had a beginning, therefore it had a cause. That yeah, the long cosmological argument. Um, yeah, and I think that the question is, what is the argument for premise one? Is what you're asking. What is the argument for premise one? When the question is asked, what is the argument for premise one? The response from the transcendentalist or presuppositionalist is that there is no argument for premise one's veracity, but a demonstration for premise one's veracity. In that premise one, the demonstration is that when we look at the world, it obviously exemplifies design, order, and intentionality, and it points to an intentional designer in our world. Basically. So we're just looking at the world, and we're saying that this points to a precondition, and precondition is God. Yeah. So it's not an argument. I promise you. I mean, I don't think that there's an argument because this is what's going to happen. PhD. This is what's going to happen. If I gave a justification, which I can't, if I gave a justification in an argument and it has premise one, premise two, and conclusion, the same question is going to be asked again. I think you know what it is. What is the argument for premise one? I do that again. I do that again by giving another syllogism. I'm going to be asked again, what is the argument for premise one? And it's going to continue. It's going to continue. So I think that the people who formulated the transcendental argument, they saw that and they say it is not an argument that justifies it or that shows its veracity. It is a demonstration in that as we look, and it doesn't have to be everyone. You can look at the world and have a different conclusion. But as we look, as I look at the world, I see the design, I see the order. I also see disorder, but I see order. And I say, this points to something. And this thing that it points to is God, that has these qualities that would ground existence and reality. Yeah. Well, let me give you the argument. Premise one, um, um, for X to be the case, Y must be the case. Premise two, X is the case. Conclusion, therefore Y is the case. So I would say that Y is God and X is um, any fact of existence. So let's just say existence itself. Let's just say existence itself. Or I'm going to go broader. I'm going to say existence itself, reality itself. So the argument goes like this: in order for reality to be the case, God must exist. Reality is the case. Conclusion: therefore, God exists. So premise one would have to be justified with another argument. But we're saying we have no argument for that. What we have is a demonstration in that you look at the world, you look at reality, it exemplifies ultimate design and intentionality. Therefore, it points to an ultimate intentional designer. And we see that this designer is God. When we look at scripture, we see that this God exemplifies the qualities and attribute set that grounds every aspect and fact of existence and reality. So we say, okay, this must be God. So we're just saying it must be God because we see that the world points to God. Yeah. I would ask them, why don't you see it? And the reason that they would give, I would see if I could respond to the reason, because if okay, go ahead. Give me a reason, yeah. And then I would say then that's fair. I would say that's fair. I would say that's fair. I would say that's fair because if you see the world as necessary and you see every fact as being a brute fact, it has no ultimate explanation as to how and why, it just is. Then if that's how you see the world, we have a we have a difference of perception and a difference of worldview. And there, I mean, oh yeah, and I see that mine would be necessary, bro. Honestly, I have to say to you, man, well, in my worldview, there is an answer for that. In that, I'm a determinist. I'm a determinist. I'm a determinist. So, I actually am of the belief that everything we believe has been predetermined by a source, and an atheist, some would say, because not all are determinists. I don't even see how all atheists can't are not determinists, because that would be the logical conclusion. But some atheists who are determinists would say that they agree with me to an extent in that what we believe or what our positions are were thousands of years in the making by natural laws and natural effects. Mine is different in that everything we believe and everything that we hold to in our positions were decreed and determined by a personal agent, and that personal agent is God. So the reason why I would say, we have a difference of belief and difference of position is ultimately grounded in God. But proximately, we can look at our lives and see how we got here. There's obviously some nurturing in there, but God determines the means and the ends. So that would be what I would say is the difference. Yeah. Well, actually, no, because let me tell you why. Because I have examined my worldview critically, and I think it's no. I mean that's fine. That's fine. I'm just giving you a short snippet of what I think is very important for everyone. All of us should critically evaluate our worldview to see if it's consistent. And I have done that, and I've looked at the alternative. I've seen that aspect of my worldview that you just pointed out, and I'm like, wow, this looks very bad. Okay, what's the alternative? So the alternative would be the world is determined by natural effects, and all of these things would be determined anyway, but they would be determined without a purpose and without any meaning ultimately. We just be here as natural effects, just like everything is a natural effect, and nothing would have any meaning at all. Whereas in the worldview that I'm proposing, even though some people are wrong and they are made to be wrong ultimately by God, it is for a purpose and for a reason, hence has a meaning behind it. So I would say the distinction would be the purpose and the meaning. Of course, go ahead. Oh, I see what you mean. Mhm. Wait, say that again. The contents and the what of the belief? The relevance? Okay, the consequences. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. What I understand is that there is a distinction. I'm trying to map it like map it on for me as to how I okay, go ahead. Hmm. Okay, okay. Okay, so what you have ascertained is that the reasons why I hold my position is because of the consequences of the belief, and because the consequences of one belief seems to be worse than the other, I chose the one that has less consequences. Is that it? That's a part of it. Would you say that that's a part of it? Okay, okay, okay. All right, let me throw something else in there. Let me throw something else in there. In my worldview, my ultimate standard of epistemology by which I can know things to be true or false, the tools that I use to know those things or know things to be true or false are the tools provided to me by God's word and God's revelation. So for me to question that worldview or to question the veracity of that worldview would be to use those tools that I have to ascertain what truth is. And if I use the tools that I have to ascertain if the tools that I'm using are true or false, it would be to abandon the tools themselves to evaluate the tools with something else because there's no way of using the tools to evaluate the tools and not be circular. So I would have to leave my worldview, find tools of truth somewhere else, and evaluate if my worldview is true or not. But in my worldview, PhD, truth is God's revelation. So if I leave that, I'm going to be left with what I would have to call radical skepticism, in that I can't know what is true from what is false, because in my mind, I don't see anything that I could use outside of God's word to try and prove God's word to be true or false. Do you get what I'm saying? Give me an example, like universal truth, like logic and stuff like that. Yeah. Oh, self-evident truths. No, I wouldn't reject self-evident truths. I would just say that self-evident truths. I would say that self-evident truths have a grounding in something. They have an ultimate grounding, and that grounding would be God or Yahweh. Oh, I mean, this is very amazing, and one of the reasons why I love TikTok is because I get to have like an intellectual tango where questions are thrown at me that are very difficult to answer, and then I try to answer them based upon what I've studied, and what I've studied is then articulated in my mind in an answer. What I mean, you asked a very good question about the grounding. What I mean by a grounding is a foundation that gives the origination to the fact of experience that we're making reference to. So let's say the fact of experience is what you mentioned, self-evident truths. Where did those come from? It has an origin. So the grounding would be that which created them, sustains them, and controls them. That's not what I'm saying, though. I'm saying there has to be a grounding. I say it's God, and somebody else can say it's something else, and then we would have logical discourse to try and ascertain who would be right and who would be consistent and stuff like that. There has to be a grounding. Would those philosophers take the other route, other route, and say that they are what's the other thing? Coherentists, coherentists. It, oh, you surprised? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually don't know how to answer that. I don't know how to answer why I think there needs to be something ultimate. I I I would say that that would be the ultimate brute fact. That I don't know how to answer why do we need something to be ultimate. I would say that something is ultimate. Something is. That's where I would say, hey, this is something that just is. It's ultimate, and there is one thing that does not have any further ultimate explanation as to why and how. And I'm sure you're aware of what is called a brute fact, right? Yeah. So some people say there is no ultimate. What we have are just brute facts. Brute facts. We have a lot of things that we observe and that we are aware of, and they have no ultimate explanation as to how and why. But they just are. These things just are. I would say that I would adopt a brute facts answer when it comes on to God, and God would be the ultimate explanation for how and why all other facts are the way they are. So I would take the brute facts answer with that question that you gave, because I don't see a better way of answering it thus far. And some other Christian who knows more than I do can probably answer it better than I can. But right now, that is the best way I can answer it. God is the ultimate brute fact, and that is how I would say that I don't know how to answer why we need an ultimate brute fact. I would say that the brute fact just is, it's there, and we identify it as Christians, and that grounds existence and reality the way it is. Yeah. So yeah, yeah, yeah. And that a design points to a designer, and I have to say, to what you said, I have to be as honest as I can be in these conversations. I'm not a bully. I don't try to ever be a bully. And when I bump into bullies, I just kick them off because I don't want to bring that side of me out. Because I do have a bullying side of me where I can be mean too, as well as the other guy who is mean back to me or whatever. I always try to have these conversations respectfully and try to have myself and the opposition walk away from the conversation disagreeing with each other but respecting each other. So, yeah. No, I wouldn't say that to you. I would just say, and you would say the same thing back to me. I would just say you're wrong and I disagree with you. But you would say the same thing to me because we have opposing worldviews. And I would say that, as you know, yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's fair. And that's fair. And that's fair because I have to acknowledge that you and I see things differently and you have a different conclusion from what you look at. You and I can look at the same thing as we are in this moment. We look at the world. You may agree or disagree that it has some order to it, and you say that you don't think that that necessarily points to a mind or a God. And I can say, wow, this world has order, must point to a God. You get what I'm saying? So you and I have different conclusions based upon what we see. So I can't be a different time, a different time. I'm winding down. What I was saying was that you and I, and you can agree with me, that you and I look at the same thing and come to different conclusions. And what I was saying is that that is fair. That is fair. I understand. We are different people. All of us have different perspective, and we come to different conclusions. But because I'm a Christian, I have an exclusivity to my worldview, and that I think that I'm right and everyone's wrong. It's arrogant, I know, but this is why we have to be honest with our Christianity, with our worldview. Because if I were to say, hey, everybody is right and everybody has is a different path to God, all you have to do is yeah, yeah. So I have to point out my arrogance to a certain point and say I'm right and everybody else is wrong. But we can still have respectful conversations and dialogue, and we have done that in this conversation. And I thank you very much, PhD in AD. I'm not gonna say the whole name. It's PhD, bro. Thank you so much for coming up, man. Give me a follow, and when I go live again, we can talk again. Definitely, I'm gonna remember your name, PhD in ADHD. All right, man. Later. All right, that was a good conversation. That was a good conversation, as usual. And we have to acknowledge that we have our presuppositions. We have to acknowledge that we look at the world differently. And all of you, my subscribers on YouTube, we all have presuppositions. We all look at the world and come to different conclusions. I'm not going to beat up an atheist for looking at the world and not seeing that the world exemplifies God. I'm not going to beat up an atheist for that because, they may look at the same thing and not come to the same conclusion. I'll just say, hey, you're wrong, and here's why, but I'm not going to beat them up as if they're stupid and dumb for coming to the conclusion that, hey, they just don't think that God did it. I think God did it, and I think I have good reasons for thinking God did it, but I could give those reasons, and those reasons could be thrown down or rejected by an atheist, and that's fine. That's fine. They can disagree. They can disagree. I just think they're wrong. And they can say that I'm wrong too. It's fine. But just to close this off, to finally say the argument one more time, the transcendental argument goes like this: as we look at the world and we see its exemplification to us, we obviously see order, we obviously see design and intentionality, and this would therefore point to an ultimate designer and one who is intentional. And this intentional designer is one who is the ultimate unifying single causal principle that actualizes, sustains, and controls existence and reality itself. Either one is going to acknowledge the necessity of God, or one is going to deny the necessity of God. Either one is going to make propositions with reference to the necessity of God, or one is going to make propositions without reference to the necessity of God. Either you deny God or you affirm God. And you know, when they deny God or when they say it's not God, the alternative to me is always, I don't know what it is. I know there's something, but I don't know what it is. And I've met a few people who, take that position. That's fine. They know there's something, they don't know what it is, and they don't think it's God. They're not really saying they know it's not God. They're just saying they don't think it is God. And how can you beat somebody up for saying that they don't think it's God? No, it's fine. It's totally fine. Yeah, busy mommy. Admitting limitations and respecting the others. Yeah, of course. I had to, kick a few people off. I mean, today and earlier tonight, because I didn't see the mutual respect. But it's fine. We are going to have people like that on here. Yeah. So I'm gonna jump off and get back to studying. Maybe I'll jump back on in a few hours because going on TikTok and having conversations, it wakes me up when I feel like falling asleep when I'm studying in the night. So I'm gonna jump off now and I'll see you guys again eventually. See you guys soon. Um, I don't notice. I just hopped on about 20 minutes ago. Yeah, busy mom. Yeah, I had a few people who were, yeah. Definitely a refresher, man. Definitely a refresher. I had a few people on who were not very respectful, but others who were. So I'm grateful for that. Salam alaikum, my brother. Have a good night. Well, good morning. Have a good one. Later. I'll be back on eventually, maybe in a few hours. Later, everybody. Sure, busy mom. If you're up, you can join back up. Salam, my brother. Salam. All right, I'm done. Uh, got 8 more subscribers. I need to get to 1,000. One day, 3,000 in order for me to go on YouTube. Well, not YouTube. In order for me to go live with my camera and stuff. Yeah. All right, I'm going to end the live here. Oh, let's just pause. How much do I know? Because there's a lot of things that we presuppose and believe that have not been scientifically proven.